All right. We are back. But to answer that question again, I want to repeat it, because I want, after this is recording, to make sure people all got the whole thing. The first question, the question originally from the brother Naeem Sharif from Facebook was, if I go on the medium of ancient Africa, there were no TVs, there were no newspapers. The medium was what they put on the walls. Art was the medium. How they wanted to interpret what was going on at that time to last for a lifetime is what they put on the walls. That was their medium. That was what they were able to communicate to other people, is to make sure it was etched in stone. That's a very general question, because the question was, just to again go even further, is exactly what does it mean when you see people with yellow skin in Kush? And see, it's really no other real way to answer that. There's no one way to answer that question, but you have to answer it from different angles. First of all, when you're dealing with what's now known as Kush, this is one thing that we have to learn how to stop doing too. And this is not to knock anyone, but this is just as a general statement we have to stop doing. The words that we use, number one, were relegated to the devil's language. The word Kush. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what is the language of Kush? The word Kush itself, Kuwsh. Kuwsh is actually a Chaldean word. When you look in the Bible, when it says Genesis chapter 2, verse 13, when it says Ethiopia in the Hebrew, what they would be Hebrew is actually a Chaldean word, Kuwsh, which meant dark or dark skin. Okay? Again, that's not an original word. Then the next statement should be, this is how you answer something thoroughly before you even get completely into the answer, because we're still defining everything by their words. People who came to us as foreigners. So those that they will call Cushites, they didn't call themselves Cushites. So when you're looking at what you see on the walls, and just to go even further into that, we have to exactly know, what does it mean? What exactly did we call ourselves? What does a Cushite mean? Cushites is just what? Those of a black land that was what we will call either Ethiopia, still relegated to their words, Kush or Meroe. But these are still their words. Again, 90% of the words that we're going to say are going to be relegated to Caucasians, relegated to Caucasian language. And so when we're asking questions, which is what we're supposed to do, we're dealing with exactly their words. So that's the first thing we got to get to. Now, dealing with what's on the medium. Remember, bits and pieces of Kush had already been mixed. So when you're looking at a medium, you're not looking at all of Kush, you're looking at bits and pieces of something. See, people look at Egypt as just one country. When they say Egypt, when you're dealing with up and down of a Nile, you're dealing with a large portion of Africa at one point before it was colonized completely by Europeans and the Asians. So when you're looking at what you see on the medium on the walls, you have yellow skin. You also have Asians who was also in what people will call Kush at one point as well, or what we will call Sudan as well. But it was a very small portion of them. You understand? And eventually, after you go even further and further down the line, over a 100-year span, when you're dealing with a time of pre-dynastic, those people will end up being pushed out or try to suppress. They either were pushed out by the original black Africans, or they ended up becoming part of the group of people. And so if you look on the stelas, most of the stelas you see that's in what we would call Kush or Sudan, you're going to see dark-skinned people. Then when you go into what's now known as ancient, down in ancient Egypt, you're going to still see dark-skinned people. But then now you're going to see more of a lighter complexion, because now what becomes highlighted now is the new kingdom. So a lot of what we see in ancient Egypt now is not going to be a black African perspective of what happened. You're going to get a mixture. That's why after a while, the perception of ancient Kemet is no longer old and middle kingdom, which really comprised mostly of Kushite. You're going to get more of a new kingdom Ptolemy perspective where it was very much mixed. So now there's going to be different instances in Sudan where it was, or in Sudan or in what we would call Kush today, where you're going to see different parts of it on the walls that everyone might not be dark-skinned. Some parts of that medium is going to be light-skinned, because during a certain period, they had already been mixed. But it was a very small portion. It wasn't as much as it once was during the first dynasty of Namr or Namir or Menes, whereas it became so much to the point where they had to go to war to push out the Assyrians and the Asians during the first dynasty of Namir or Menes. So you're going to see different parts of that medium on the walls, which is a very small portion. But you will see that because they had already became part of the society up until a certain point. And then eventually they end up becoming pushed out, because after a certain point, the Caucasians ended up, or the Neanderthals, the whites at that time, they were all bunched up together. And see, this was the first form of racism in the world. The first form of racism in the world is not a systematic racism like Dr. Neely Fuller or Francis Cress Welsing would define. It's defined as identifying who your enemy is. And see, when you're looking at those of Sudan or Meroe or Kush, you're looking at a group of people who are compassionate enough to try to deal with these Caucasians a certain way, these cavemen and women a certain way. But they ended up trusting or being too compassionate and having to push these people back into the caves of Europe. So, and they ended up having to identify every single one of them as being what we will call as a papist. This was the first sign of what people will call the devil in modern times. Because prior to that, there's no sign of there's no identifying a devil into the world. That's what we would call a religious thing. But it wasn't even called the devil. A papist just meant evil one. But it was basically a group of them that they felt, okay, because the Kushites and those of Sudan did not believe in mixing in with them, because they too believed that if we keep our genes pure, that genetically we will continue to remain strong. But those that they decided to try to blend in with society, the very small amount of Caucasians or cavemen and women that decided to allow to be in their society ended up trying to rise up against them and take their women, and they had to push them back into Europe. So that was the first time that you had a period where a group of people were labeled evil because of their actions. And these were the whites or Caucasians or Neanderthals of their time. You had a group of Asians, and you had a group of what we would call Assyrians. You follow? they were the first ones to try to come in and take over, bit by bit, try to take over what we would now know as Meru or Kush. So again, we have to be able to identify who is who, because a lot of times what you're seeing now also, that's why I said it's very hard to just say this is what it was, even though that was part of the problem. The next level is that you have a whitening period that's going on right now based upon white supremacy, where they go into parts of Africa where it's just clear as day who the gods were, and they'll go in and they'll lighten the images of the people. And they've been doing this for hundreds of years now because they're trying to hide the fact of who we were to ourselves, because they can't genetically connect themselves to certain groups of people who ruled. See, now, there's an argument that people will say, well, look, there's these movies coming out, especially, Gods of Egypt, where the Egyptians were white and, no, the gods were black. It's funny, you look at the movie, the gods are white, they got one black god, but the rest of them are white. And, but depending on the time period, because, again, once you go into Ptolemy, that culture becomes very much mixed to where, Rome basically comes in and basically takes over Egypt after the immigration laws were taken down in Kemet to try to do whatever we could to basically bring in our enemy to allow peace to reign, because we were tired of going back and forth in war with these whites. See, at that time, there was no, as we would do now, we would try to say, okay, it's not the system. It's not all whites, it's the system. Whereas back then, we knew who the enemy was. We didn't have to, we didn't try to take a group here and take a group there and say that they're not good, but these over here are bad. Even if you had 10 or 20 of them that may have been good, they all were put in that same category and they all were sacked. Because we knew what was going on was going to be we knew what was at stake, and we knew what they were trying to do. Because what was going on was basically a complete miscegenation process of trying to breed out the gods of Kemet. So when you're looking at certain movies, that depict Egyptians as white, the question should be, based on intelligence, what dynastic period you're talking about. Because if you go back from the first dynasty, since we want to deal with dynastic periods, you want to go from the first dynasty all the way up until, let's say, the end of the Middle Kingdom, up until between from the first all the way to at least the 25th dynasty, you're dealing with mostly Nubian people. Remember, Namir or Menes is a Nubian. He's a Cushite. You understand? He wasn't born in Kemet. He was, remember, the first Egyptians, all these people from Sudan to Nubia to Meroe, they were all the same people. They were of the same family. So there wasn't a difference between the two. They just ended up being in two different spots at a specific time when the dynastic periods began to take shape. So there wasn't a difference. Just like when you go into Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep II is a Nubian. You understand? But yet, just saying he's a Nubian as if it's a difference between a Nubian and someone who was born of Kemet. They're from the same family, so we do that because we do our best to identify what he looked like, because we already know, okay, if I say Nubian to this individual, there's no way to argue the degree of melanin in that individual, the degree of non-ether in an individual. But then people will try to say, well, the original people of ancient Kemet were of a a Pale Arab stock, but we know historically speaking, the Pale Arabs did not come into Kemet until the 7th century when they brought in Islam. So that would be false as well. But again, there's many different factors into why we see what we see on the medium now, or what we will call now Egypt. Again, because they cannot genetically connect themselves, the Muslims that you see there today, they are now in connection with the Europeans of the world to try to white out the history of ancient Kemet. Because if I could white out the history of ancient Kemet, then I can cut off a whole generation of making a connection to who we were. Because when you have children and you want to teach them about what you've done at that time, and then just say you decide to make a trip over there to that side of the world, to Egypt, but then you go over there and you see the monuments are now being brought down, they're being demolished. You have different stelas that are now whited out. You got different carvings that are now being whited out. They're now getting lighter and lighter. You have people that are just completely whiting out the complete, completely whiting out the whole image because they want people to now see themselves as God. They're trying to, the whole point of it is what we would call revision. See, people think revision is just to, these are old words and old ways of doing things. It's like with Christians. They would see the New International Version of the Bible as a revision. But in reality, if you compare the King James Version to New International Version, you see how they purposely took things out of the New International Version. When they went from King James to New International, you see a total difference. Because then you'd have to also make the confession that the King James Version was also plagiarized from ancient Sumerian texts. And those ancient Sumerian texts was plagiarized out of the Egyptian mysteries. So that's the reason why, if you notice, revision takes shape literally every 5 to 10 to 20 years. Because then all whites have to do, because of white supremacy, is just what they will call revise things, quote unquote, which is what they're doing is scratching Africans out of history. That's why taking the trip there and being able to teach your own people about what you've done is extremely necessary. And even if you cannot make the trip, it's time that we are able to teach from our own scholars, from my father's mouth, my father's works, to Dr. Ben's works, to Dr. Clark's work, to Dr. Sertimer's work, to Ashwa Kwesi's work. These are teachers that spent their life in teaching about African people and what they've done. But we are stuck in a system where the only validity that we have is based upon what whites say that we've done. If whites say it, then it has to be true.
Has to be true.
That's not going to work. And because what that's basically saying to me is that, the only way for something to be real is if whites say it, that is true. But if our own black authorities say it, then it's not true. That's called, it's like what we're trying to do is preserve our history. But the only way to preserve our history is to get confirmation from white people. See, when whites want to tell a lie, they don't get black confirmation about that lie. They just tell the lie. But when we went around, or we go around and tell the truth, then we have to basically get a reference point from what white people say. That's the only way for it to be true. White people have to say it, so therefore it has to be true. Because the white man is God. Subconsciously, that's really what we say. When you keep running around telling someone that they're pseudo because everything that they say is not a source from a white writer. Because then it makes it true because a white man said it. But again, whites made themselves a filter off of Kemet. They became the filter because they had to start themselves at a certain point. Their point of origin is contact with us as Cushites. You understand? Because when they want to log, once the African begins to log them, what's even better is that then they get mad because then we will log them as cave people. But then if they log themselves, then they can basically cosmetically create it as being, well, we just came in contact with those of ancient Kemet and, of the ancient Egyptians, and we came in and we were shepherd kings or shepherd prisoners, and we were prisoners to those people, so we were also in their land as prisoners. Yeah, because what they will call the Hebrews, the Jacob El or Jacob Har, which were what will be called the Jacobites. Those are the Hyksos rulers. Yeah, that would be you, right? But from a basic ancient Kemetic perspective or a Cushite perspective or a Sudanese perspective, you would be the devil because of what you were doing to our people on a very small level. Remember, we judge people because of the laws of Ma'at based on nature. This wasn't based on right and wrong and morals, because blacks deal at this time with morals because of religion. Right and wrong, judgment based on, what we would call the idealistic principle. Some people are good and some people are bad, inherently, as opposed to dealing with reality when you're dealing with culture or when you're dealing with nature. Because if I'm counting you in society and I'm logging you as a Caucasian in society, you truly are the devil. I can't get away from that because of what you've done to everybody else on the planet, from slavery to war to colonialism. You've been doing that since you crept from the caves. You've been trying to exterminate our race by mixing in with us and raping us since you crept from the caves as Neanderthals. So you want to be able to tell your story the way you want to tell it, because your only time reference is 6,000 years. Prior to 6,000 years, there's no real logging of time for you. That's why when blacks tell the story of themselves and of white people, they get extremely petrified, because then you actually have to tell the real story of who you really are. There was a book, and there's a reference point. There's a book that was written years ago, and I used to have this book. It was called The Origin of the White Race. Okay, Nell Painter wrote, there's a sister named Nell Painter that wrote her book as well, called The Origin of the White Race. But there was a book that came out prior to her book, and what was said was, this was records of what was kept of ancient Kemet, of their contact with those that were in the caves, the Europeans. And what they said was, those of ancient Kemet, based upon what they translated from the Metanetta, was they had to keep these Caucasians or these cave people inside of the caves by building a wall to keep them inside. They literally had to build almost like a story wall to keep them inside, like a maze. You know how a maze is, rather than, like the barricades all around it, where it was like inside, whereas you just had this big, huge wall that kept these people inside because of the animalistic nature that they had. That was a real truth. That was literally what they recorded. So when they were trying to it's like literally being people. Yeah, exactly. It was like, okay, we have to keep these animals inside where they are. That was what they recorded. And see, we went from, as Africans, from that mindset of knowing the nature of certain people to now trying to find some way to integrate with these people. They haven't. You got to realize they're still trying to evolve from where they are, from where they once were. Excuse me. They're still trying to evolve from that mindset. You can't evolve from your nature. You're only gonna. It's like water.
That's who you be.
Yeah, it's still who you are. Water is only gonna wherever you pour it from is only going to go back to its source. It doesn't matter. You can come outside with some water, and you can go to it. You can go wherever the sewer is, and you can pour it on the ground. It's going to flow right back to where it starts. You watch that water, it's going to travel back to where it's supposed to be. You watch water and you watch the actual flow of water, it goes along with the principles and the laws of the universe as to how the flow of it is supposed to go. Case in point, in every part of society, everybody deals with nature except blacks in this time. We deal from everything from a religious perspective. We try to find a good and bad, good and bad, good and bad in everything. Whereas when we want to deal with our people, we see each other from a Caucasian perspective. When we see white people, we try to find the goodness in white people as opposed to saying, look.
That's what it is.
Right. We don't want to say, look at what they've been doing to us for this amount of time, and look at what they've been doing to everybody for X amount of time. What are we supposed to do about this? We either eliminate them or we preserve our own race by separating from them. The choice is yours. That's literally what you learn to do from the law of the universe. You stop playing with yourself, and you stop playing with the people that you're supposed to be preserving, because at the end of the day, this is who we are. We have to be able to understand that we are alone in what we're trying to rebuild as African people. And if we're not trying to rebuild ourselves and we keep trying to integrate, then what's going to happen is that, as the brother Dr. Carl Anderson, the great elder, said, we will be a permanent underclass. Because if they could throw out martial law against us at any given time, then they see us as a group that can be easily exterminated. And that's what I mean by they have evolved from what they once were, but their nature is still manifesting itself based upon how they treat everybody across the world. So we have to start looking at things as we have to be the ones to teach our children what we did. That's why it's extremely dangerous now to bring our children into their school systems, because their school systems now is teaching little black kids that too much melanin is actually a negative. Being too dark is a negative. They teach this now in cultural anthropology class.
Wow.
That the only way that there's a difference between skin color is the land that you lived in, and when you have climatology that creates skin color, what you're saying is that genetically we're all the same, even though we know it's not true. But that's being taught to our children. See, as long as I can keep teaching your children that we're all the same, then I can always keep taking credit for what you did that I didn't do. You know, that's a very slick approach. The devil is very slick. He'll find ways to keep doing the same thing to you, keep lying to you and your children while we keep making excuses for them.
Yeah.
You know, it's because we're getting caught up in our own compassion that we're beginning to not follow the laws of nature. And as long as we follow, once we begin to truly follow the laws of nature, then we can begin to truly go back to who we once were as God. But as long as we're judging everybody by this idealistic, maybe there's some good, maybe I know we've seen some bad, but there is some good, it's like
no good. You
have to shut the door at some point. And if you do not learn to shut the door, you're going to let the wrong people in. I'm sure, of course, as I'll go at some point I'll go into the Boule society, there's some bad blacks that have become submissive to white supremacy. But the reality is that we have to just accept them for what they are, and we have to also push them to the side as well. So I want to go into any questions anyone have. I decided to open it up a certain way tonight without muting, and anyone has any questions, we can go into it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. can also go back to another question I just got to. So, thanks for being patient with me, y'all. Just got an inbox of a question. Let's see. Okay. Question. I noticed a lot of people now are two questions. But they both deal with Rex 84, King Alfred Plan, or what is called Rex 84 now. How do we protect our people from it? How do we as black people, and this is coming from Anpu Gibson, how do we protect our people from Rex 84? Because he said he was able to listen to a class I did on Rex 84 a couple of years ago and wants to know how do we protect our people from Rex 84. It's a really good question. The first thing we need to learn how to do immediately is we have to consolidate. That means that we have to deal with good and bad of each other. We have to become what everyone else is already doing, which means that we have to be able to learn to get along with each other. It's a very basic problem that we have that we're continuing to do. We're continuing to separate in certain ways. Self-hatred is a very deep thing inside of us. That's not a born, innate thing. White supremacy creates that mechanism inside of us now. That's why I said weeks ago, white supremacy creates the coon, the Negro bedwench, and the Uncle Tom. That's slavery. These are slave mechanisms. These are submissive mechanisms to a society that was created based upon your extinction and your subjugation. So when you're dealing with martial law, where now we're dealing with phase 2 in martial law, where they immediately bring out the tanks onto you, the first thing you have to learn how to do is deal with two basic points. You have two choices. You either go to war physically, or you create an economic base to where that group no longer thinks about attacking you in that way. And seeing as how a lot of our people are not physically ready or are not even trying to physically ready to go to war, this is after we've already consolidated, because whites are forcing you to come together. A lot of the consciousness that you're seeing right now is based upon a lot of black death, because you got to realize once we desegregated and the Civil Rights Bill was passed and the Jim Crow laws had become abolished, black people got under this belief that white people began to love them. You know, immediately once the bill was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, all of a sudden white people's hearts opened up and, you know, now we can love each other and everything is ebony and ivory and whatever shit that is. We actually believe in that. We still believe in that to this day. We think it's a great thing that we no longer have a Black Wall Street or Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We think it's a bad thing to have all black things. That's why when you bring that up to the average black person, they get very disgusted with you, because they feel like being around white people is the thing that we're supposed to do.
Yep.
That's a natural process for a lot of black people, which is basically what you're saying is it's a natural process to be a slave.
Yeah.
Because if you're in the black neighborhood, 90 to 95% of those businesses are not black, they're foreign owned. And again, the devil has given everything that he's worked off of your back. All those resources and money he's given to foreigners that you actually fought during the civil rights movement to do for everybody else. Now they're coming and taking your money that you work for. That's the truth. That's factual. Historical money from slavery is pulled together first to whites, and now those same whites are given to foreigners who's coming in and going into the black community and creating their own resources. What I want to make a comparison with to people when you deal with Rex 84, remember, martial law is something you, at the end of the day, can be avoided but cannot be avoided. Meaning, you can create an economic base for yourself to where that group who is trying to penetrate you will think twice because you have the resources to come back at them and you have your own black army. Okay. But the next step is knowing the nature of the beast, is knowing that they will never stop trying to take melanated blood because they need melanin to survive. They're trying to infuse with African people. There's no way to get around it. These are natural vampires of the world. So there's no way to avoid it. What you have to do is learn to preserve your own race by learning that you are in a 500-year war. See, we think that we see instances. Part of defeating Rex 84 is realizing where you are. In order for you to win a game, you have to realize that you are being played. You understand? This war is fought on several different fronts. It's from economic to physical to religion to education. And we're getting beaten on every one of them because we are trying to we're trying to basically educate ourselves and survive as opposed to competing and excelling. We're not even competing, we're just trying to survive because we're still thinking like slaves.
That's the race you're talking about.
You know, we have an exception to the rule, so we'll pick up the exception to the rules by looking at a Michael Jordan or an Oprah Winfrey or a Jay-Z as if that's coming up, whereas you had exceptional Negroes during slavery who made a little bit of money here and there. So you'll pick out the slave who's made a little bit of money here and there and say that we finally come up, which is what other slaves did as well. So you don't have to actually deal with where you are as being a slave. Mm-hmm. So the first step is you have to have black consolidation. Remember, no group is going to try to come at you if they see you in large numbers because they'll know there's going to be a repercussion for constantly coming at you. Okay? The examples of Rex 84 that happened to black people that we can clearly see that happen on television is the Rodney King riots where they brought in the tanks. You had Ferguson when they brought in the tanks, and then you had Baltimore where they brought in the tanks. They go from fate. Remember, if you go back to Ferguson, when Ferguson happened back in 2014, remember in the beginning there was no media coverage. Most of the media coverage that you had was from social network sites from a lot of brothers and sisters who had their cell phones out or they had their digital cameras and they were just walking around just recording what was going on. So they really was recording from just an amateur level, journalism on an amateur level, because that was strategic from the devil. The devil wanted to take it from his perspective by saying, you know what, we're not even going to bring in any cameras until we bring in our military structures and we subdue these Africans where they are. So that was purposely done because then I don't have to even tape this. Yeah, I realize just like with if y'all go back to Chris Dorner, the cop that was going around killing whites when they pissed him off and he was trying to do good in California. Next thing you know, you see him going out killing whites and killing their families. When they finally was able to get to him, they told all of the news media to not come out and basically told all the news media to go home. Basically, told all the news media to go home so that we can go ahead and burn him inside of his cabin. Yeah. Okay? Now, they did the same exact thing to black people in Ferguson. They didn't allow any media coverage to go on in certain parts of Ferguson because they wanted to be able to do whatever they wanted to do to us without anyone knowing about it. That's why there's several pictures during that time that leaked where people were just taking pictures with their camera phones and showing how they used the freeways to bring in the tanks. They didn't come straight through the street. They were able to shut down the freeways and bring the tanks in through the freeways. Okay? When you have a group of people, see, this is a very good question because then you're able to put everything together to tell people how we're able to solve our problem. And our biggest problem is our disunity because any group, it don't have to be white people, any foreign group can look at us and see what the main problem is that we're scattered all over the place. And because of religion, I can pinpoint a group. Like, for example, I can pinpoint the Moors over here, they're in their corner. Hebrew Israelites, they're in their corner. You got RBGs in their corner. You got Nuwaubians in their corner. This is the truth. But they all have a ideology that they adhere to, which is their choice, which is they have their right to do what they choose to do. But the reality is that what keeps them where they are is their ego. And see, Caucasians have no problem with you doing that. They have no problem with you being in a specific position away from them. It's okay for you to do that. It's okay for you to call yourselves whatever group you are, as long as you're not in unification with another group that realizes that we both have the same problem. You see, if you go back to, and this is just, anyone can use this as a starting point for how Caucasians think. You go back to the Holy Tablet. My father had a part in there in the beginning where he talked about the Luciferians. He said Luciferians may not like each other, they may hate each other, but whenever it's time to come together to do evil, they put all the differences aside and just come together and do work. They might all have 6 or 7 different factions of different belief systems that they all adhere to, but at the end of the day, when it's time to come together to do work, they just come together and do work. As opposed to there's no actual front. You have National Black United Fronts all over the United States, which is an organization in itself, but at the same time, the only way for you to basically protect yourself from martial law is that all the labels, first off, has to be put to the side. All of the ideological debates and back and forth stuff has to be put to the side for a period of time. We can debate all that stuff on the inside, but not allowing the devil to watch us have this unity as consistently as we keep doing. You see, you keep airing out your dirty laundry, and you're just sitting back laughing at you, as if that's what we really are. So now, the next step is, once we've been able to consolidate, because in my heart of minds, I believe we can do that. It's not a belief, I know we can. The next phase is being able to have people who, from every faction, because some factions don't have an army and some factions do. The group that has the army has to be able to train the people who never thought about these things. Some groups are extremely benevolent. They're extremely agreeable. They don't think about fighting anybody, but they have all the knowledge in the world. Those that may not have all the knowledge but have all the actual military training can teach the other group. And then those that don't have the army but have the knowledge they trade off. So everybody there is able to have an idea of what guerrilla warfare is, because we have become very comfortable in our positions right now. We're very comfortable in how things are working, so that means that white supremacy has refined itself to where the slave is now comfortable inside of the plantation. See, at one point, you have to think about whether you was going to get whooped or hung from a tree. There was nothing to look forward to. There was no promotion at a job. There was no bonus at a job. There was no Christmas bonus. There was no welfare check. There was no unemployment. If I get fired, I can get my unemployment check. You wasn't thinking about that. You was thinking about, pick this goddamn cotton, pick this tobacco, pick these leaves, pick these grass, or I'm going to get shot or get hung from somewhere or get beat to a pulp in front of my wife and my children. Whereas now, if they want to emasculate you, they just do it on the television screen, or they do it in so many different ways. So it's many different ways that they do it to you. So now it's no longer an individual in front of your family. It's in front of your family, but it's systematic. So that they not only subjugate you in front of 3 people, they subjugate you in front of 10,000 to 1 million people. So now everybody, not only your group, but every other group can see you as what they've already made you become, a little boy. A grown boy is what a lot of our men have become inside of a system. that has been designated on his and her extinction. So it comes down to strengths and weaknesses. Every organization has a strength, every organization has a weakness. And if we're honest with ourselves, then the ego can be subdued. A lot of us don't want to get rid of our egos. We like to pretend that we have everything figured out. When you ask people questions, they don't want to just say, I don't know. They'll just say, or they'll answer the question, but not from a very honest perspective, which when you're doing people like that, they like to waste time. As long as I'm wasting time, then I can pretend I have everything figured out. But if I'm not honest, but once I have an obligation of integrity, then I have to actually realize and tell myself and the other person I'm dealing with that I don't have everything figured out. That we really need to start coming together and start solving our own problems. You understand? People will look and automatically think Rex 84 is just a tank with a cannon inside of your face. No, Rex 84 is also FEMA camps where they come and get you, scoop you up, and they bring you to certain areas to where they interrogate you. And if you don't answer certain questions correctly, it's over for you. There's certain movies that actually put this out in the forefront. You got the movie Terminator Salvation with our brother Common was in that, and then you have the old Red Dawn movie with Charlie Sheen and Patrick Swayze, where they went really deep into what Rex 84 was in the FEMA camps. Remember, FEMA camps has been something that they've been revolutionizing since the mid-'80s. Since Rex 84, or Readiness Exercise 84, was coined by Oliver North. So all these things that we're looking at as the boogeyman, there's no boogeyman. It's just something that they're preparing to basically continue to revolutionize for your extinction. You just have to be able to solve the problem as a people. We look at it from, oh man, that's over. That's not even this. We might as well just lay down. Let them come get us. No. What you do is you have to be able to study your enemy and how it works. We're in this process of just studying ourselves and thinking that that's just going to be what it is. No, they've been studying you since they realized what a pineal gland was. They've been studying African people since they realized what a pituitary gland was. Since they've been studying the actual brain and how it works, they've been studying African people since slavery. They opened up Africans who have died during slavery to study how they were able to work so long, how their mind worked, how they were able to take beatings as well as we did. They studied us like this, like lab rats. It's people think that slavery was just plantations and cotton. No, you had different labs where they were experimenting on black people. They've been experimenting on black people for hundreds and hundreds of years, not just in America, but also in the Caribbean as well. Yeah. You understand? And if we're not really putting all this together and studying our enemy for what he and she is, then we will lose because we're afraid to see them for what they are, because we're trying to find a way to hopefully get along, and that's not going to work. It's not going to continue to work, and it never has worked. It's like running into a brick wall in a car 30 miles an hour, thinking at some point the wall will move and give away to you. No, you're going to give away eventually. So we have to be able to go online, and I'll be talking a little bit about Rex 84 in the lecture I'll be doing in New York on the 14th. I'll give a little bit about what that is, of course, as part of the Luciferian conspiracy. But we have to be able to go and do our own research and realize that it's a lot deeper than what we may think it is. But we have to study. We have to study our enemy and not be afraid to study our enemy. It's very important. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to take them now. From anybody that's online listening. I'm looking as well to see if anyone else online has any questions too. Nothing yet. at this point. Let's see. So nothing now. So again, if no one else has any questions or no one on the line has any questions, I will shut it down. No, it's pretty quick, but we'll release on for at least an hour or so. And just want to thank everyone that was able to get on. And just want to say hotep to everybody, Black Power, hotep wa ashuk, and peace.